Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs here on a 2021 Chevrolet Silverado 3500. Adding air helper springs here to your Silverado is going to be an excellent option because what it's going to do is it's going to provide some rear end support when we're towing and hauling those heavy loads. So if we don't add any suspension enhancements to our truck here and we couple that really heavy trailer or we're throwing a ton of weight in our truck bed, what that's going to do is it's going to sag the rear of the truck and it's going to bring the front end of the truck up. Now, that not only looks kind of goofy, that's actually going to have drastic effects on our overall towing experience and the handling and performance of our truck. So one of the major things that people don't realize is a lot of our braking force comes from the front axle. And that braking force relies on the weight over the axle to help the truck come to a stop. So when we take the weight off the front axle and transfer it to the rear, we're going to be drastically reducing our braking power. So in addition to the reduced stopping power, if we tow or haul frequently enough, we can also experience irregular tire wear due to the camber adjustments that change when we take the weight off the front axle. And there's tons of other things that this could affect, such as just overall instability, not responsive in our steering, and something as simple as just improper headlight aim. There's a ton of adverse side effects that you're going to experience from sagging the rear of a truck without additional support. Airbags certainly aren't the only type of suspension enhancement you can add to your truck. There's actually plenty of options on the market. But if you ask me, if you want something that's one and done, you just want to get the best, pay for it once, that's going to be the airbags. There's really no denying that this is the best option. And the reason these are the best is they allow you to adjust the pressure inside the airbags there for the best mix of support and comfort. So a lot of questions that we get, or concerns rather, that people have when they install suspension enhancements on their vehicle is that it creates a rougher ride. Well, unfortunately, that's just sort of an adverse trade-off to stiffening the suspension. In order to stiffen the suspension to reduce the sag, that's going to decrease the ride quality. There's really no way around that. But where the airbags are great is you can fine-tune that adjustment for your specific load, so you always get the best mix between support and comfort. So there's a couple different airbag options for this truck on the market. Number one, there's two manufacturers. You have Firestone, which is what these are, and you have Airlift. Now, they're both good options, but I would honestly give the edge to Firestone, and the reason for that has to do with their actual airbag construction. You see, Firestone uses a crimp roll design, and that's meaning how it attaches the rubber spring to the metal top plate here. Airlift uses a band clamp. This crimp roll design is much more durable than that band clamp, and what this allows you to do is, if you ever take your truck in for service, they can lift it by the frame of the vehicle and let the axle hang freely with the Firestone airbags. With the Airlift airbags, you're not actually supposed to do that. You're supposed to unbolt the bag from the bracket. We're going to be taking some measurements here to show you how much of a difference they can make visually, and then we're going to be taking our truck out in the test course here so we can really show you what it looks like underneath. So our truck is unloaded here. So this is the factory suspension unloaded. We're just going to take a baseline measurement here, measure from the ground to the top inside edge of the wheel well. We're looking right at 41 inches. And if we come to the front here, take that same measurement, you're looking at about 41 inches. So there's not really a big rake on this truck at all. So if you do have a real heavy load, you can definitely squat that rear end down, which is going to kick the front end up. Now keep in mind, these are just baseline measurements. Your specific exact model of truck, depending on how much load you have in it when you're measuring, or the condition of the suspension, that could all vary. So these are just baselines, keep that in mind. So now we got some weight on our truck here. We don't have a ton of weight, mind you. It's probably about 1,500 to 2,000 pounds, somewhere in that range there, just as a point of reference. Go ahead and retake our measurements of the rear here. So we dropped a full inch, so we're right at 40 inches now. Now at the front here, looks like it shot up about a ½ inch, so that may seem minor, but again, this is just a point of reference depending on how much weight, and I can almost guarantee that inch in the rear and that ½ inch in the front is going to have some effects here on our truck. So we're going to head out to our test course here. We're going to start out with the speed bumps. So we're going to get up to speed here, go over these. Yeah, you guys can hear that hit back there. That's a pretty rough ride, I'm not gonna lie there. Yeah, that's definitely could use some improvement there. Now let's head on over here to the slalom course. We'll get up to speed. We'll make some evasive maneuvers. Now normally what I see on this particular course here, we get a lot of body roll back and forth there. I suspect that's going to be the case for this as well. So that wasn't terrible. The steering didn't feel quite as responsive as it did originally, and I can definitely notice some sway and body roll back and forth with the truck. So now that we have our airbags installed, we went ahead and put that same weight back in the truck bed here. Let's go ahead and retake our measurements. If you remember before, we were at 41 inches, so now we are right back at 41 inches. So we're at the factory ride height here in the rear. So now at the front here, if you remember factory, we were at 40 inches and we're back down to 40 inches now as well. So our truck is sitting completely factory in regards to the ride height. We're gonna take our truck back through those same two tests that we showed you earlier, see if we can notice any improvements. So the steering definitely feels a lot tighter. It's definitely a little bit more responsive. And I can kind of tell that that body roll is settled down a little bit as well. So not drastic, because we really didn't have a lot of weight to begin with, but I can still see some improvements just in the small amount that we have. Now we'll come over here to our test bump course. So it wasn't as bad as before. It's still a little rough, but that's kind of the territory you get there when you increase the stiffness of your suspension. So I wouldn't say airbags are going to smooth out your ride, not drastically speaking, that is, while you're towing, because they are adding firmness to the suspension. But overall, I would say we had some improvements there. So before we start our installation today, you do need a way to sort of separate the frame of the vehicle from the axle. So the easiest way to do that is just park on a nice flat level surface there, chalk the wheels, and then use some sort of jack to lift up on the back trailer hitch. So now we need to remove our factory jounce spring. So we can start on either side, it doesn't matter. We're gonna be starting on the driver's side here. That's what your jounce spring looks like. I'm gonna take some sort of spray lubricant and I'm gonna get it between the metal cup and that rubber spring there, just to make it a little bit easier to remove. And then we can come back with some sort of pry bar. A flathead screwdriver would probably work for this as well. They usually don't always come out the first time. It sort of takes a little bit of fighting with, but you're just gonna take your pry bar there, pry it between the two pieces, between the metal and the spring. So next we need to do a little assembly outside the vehicle. So we're gonna take our upper bracket here, looks like this. It's not side specific or anything, so you don't have to worry about that. And then our spring clamps here. So you can see that one side has a large hole, one side has a small hole. This large hole is going to be facing down like so. It's going to line up these oblong holes here. And then we're going to take a flathead bolt here, looks like this, along with a flange nut. We're going to come up from underneath. You're going to stick the bolt. So you're going to come from underneath here. You're going to stick the bolt through, hold that there, and then thread on a flange nut. So I've got one there, and do that same thing over here. Keep in mind, we're not gonna be tightening these down just yet. We're still gonna leave them loose. So now that we have our upper bracket partially assembled, we're going to go ahead and install it on the vehicle. So you're going to want to slide both of these clamps out as far as possible. And you actually kind of have to hook one side, get it into position first. And then you can slide it up like so. So once we have our upper bracket into position, we're going to take our 1/4 inch hex bolts with our 1/4 inch flange nuts, and we're going to stick them through the two holes in the side of our spring clamp. So we are going to have one on either side. We need to tighten these hex bolts down, alternating from side to side, and at the same time we need to be pushing up on this plate to make sure it's flush with the bottom of the spring cup. So in order to do this, you're going to need a 10 millimeter and an 11 millimeter socket. So this can be kind of tedious because you do have to swap back and forth between sides there, but just take your time, making sure they're both tightened down evenly and making sure the plate is flush. So now once we have these hex bolts evenly tightened down, just put your finger up there to make sure the two plates are flush to one another. Do that on both sides. Looks like we're pretty good here. So now we're going to come to tightening these down and torquing them to the specifications, your instructions. So we're going to take a 7/32 Allen key. I'm going to go ahead and just snug them up with my impact first. So now we're going to come outside the vehicle. We need to do a little bit more assembly like we did previously. This time we're going to be taking our air spring, our lower bracket, and then another one of our flathead screws. So this one we're going to be doing is a little bit shorter than the other ones we were working with, and this one is black. So we're going to take our lower bracket here, it doesn't matter, these aren't side specific, and attach it to the threaded hole in the bottom of our air spring. So we're not going to be torquing this down yet, we're just going to be tightening it by hand for now, getting it about as snug as I can get it by hand. There we go. And then what I'm going to do next is, you're going to get this little rubber plug that comes on your air spring, pull that off, compress the bag down, and then reinstall it. Next, we're going to take our air spring assembly here, we're going to go ahead and set it on the vehicle like so. And then I'm going to remove that rubber plug because I want our inflation port to line up with the large hole in our upper bracket. And you'll also notice that we have an alignment pin here. Now it's very important that that alignment pin lines up with the center hole in our upper bracket. So once we've ensured that the alignment pin is in the center hole, we're going to take some sort of marker here, and basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to be marking the metal plate on the air spring, and we're going to be marking that lower bracket there, just like that. Now that we have our alignment mark made, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall that rubber plug there so we can remove this back off the vehicle. So now we're going to go ahead and take our Allen key here and go ahead and tighten this down, making sure our alignment marks stay true. Now once we have it snug, we'll come back with our torque wrench, torque it to spec. So now that we have our assembly tightened down, we'll go ahead and reinstall it on the vehicle, or release that plug, and everything should line right up. Now we'll be securing our air spring to our upper bracket, starting first with the inner tooth washer. Go ahead and place that over that large threaded stud on top of the air spring, and then thread on your hex nut. And we'll tighten that down as much as we can by hand. Come back with the wrench here and tighten it down a little bit more. So I would probably just use a crescent wrench for this, but if you want to know the actual size, it's 1 1/8 inch, so that's pretty large. You guys probably don't have one, which is why I recommend a crescent wrench, and luckily there isn't any sort of torque spec for it either. So now you're going to grab a 9/16 inch wrench and your inflation port, and we're going to be threading this into the top of that threaded screw that we just installed our hex nut on. So keep in mind, this is a brass fitting. You don't need to torque it down a whole lot. Just snug it up by hand and then give it a couple more turns with the wrench here, just so some of that sealant gets into the threads and we don't have any leaks. We're going to take our longer carriage bolts in our kit, 2 inch long. We're going to place them through one of the 2 bottom holes in our lower spring. And then we're going to take this clamp bracket here. We're going to route this behind the brake line in the wiring harness, up through the hole in the carriage bolt, and then the bottom end is actually going to hook onto the bottom of the spring perch just like that. And then we're just going to take one of our flange nuts here and secure everything together. Now once we get the front one on, we'll hop around to the back and do that same thing. So now we're going to take a 14 millimeter socket here, And we're going to go ahead and evenly tighten down these two flange nuts. Now, there is a torque spec for these bolts here, but you're really not going to be able to get a socket on these for the most part, so just tighten them as best you can. You don't need to go too crazy because the torque spec for these really isn't that high to begin with. Now, if you're not sure how much to tighten, since we can't really get a torque spec on these, I just sort of gauge the distance between these two little clamps here, just sort of make sure it's the same on both sides. So the next thing we need to do is we need to mount our inflation ports that look like this. Now in your kit, you're going to get a bolt-on option for this. That's what this little bracket is for. And generally, we just mount these to the hitch cross tube using the provided zip ties. Now that's what we're going to do. A lot of other people actually like to drill a hole somewhere into this little part of their bumper here because this is plastic. They can either replace the two screws for your license plates, I see people do that a lot, or just drill some holes in either side here. It's really up to you. I don't want to drill into the vehicle though, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the provided bolt-on option. Now it is going to be sort of cockeyed because we have part of this bracket here for our receiver tube, so it kind of pushes it off to one direction there. But I'm okay with that, so we're just going to go ahead and use the zip ties, wrap it around the cross tube, and secure it to the bracket. So now that we have our bracket secure, we're going to take our inflation port here, place a flat washer over that end, slip it through from the back side here, place on another flat washer, and then secure it with your jam nut. Once we get it on there nice and snug, come back with our 13mm wrenches and tighten it down. So we started over here on the driver's side, so once we get that done, we're just going to repeat these same few steps over on the passenger side. There's only one small difference over there. So over here on the passenger side, again, everything is going to be the same for the exception of this heat shield, which goes between the upper bracket and our air spring. And you just want to position that so it's facing your exhaust here. That way it's going to protect the airbag. So now that we have our bracket secure, we're going to go ahead and take our airline tubing here along with a set of cutters. Now it's important that while we're cutting this airline tubing here, you want to make sure you make a nice and straight cut. You don't want to use any sort of diagonal cutters or shears, anything like that. You want to make sure you're using actually specialized tubing cutters or just a knife like this, a razor blade, whatever you have that can make a nice and sharp cut. Now we'll go ahead and route the airlines from our inflation ports to each of our airbags. We're going to do that now and then we'll show you the path that we took. So we've got our lines ran. It was pretty much the same on either side here. Basically, for the first couple feet or so, you're going to go up and over the spare tire, and then you're pretty much just going to follow the frame rail all the way back. You have some zip ties in your kit you can use to secure the line so it's not getting caught up in any of the moving suspension components or the exhaust. Now these are all push to connect fittings here on these lines. Now what that means is in order to connect them to the bag or the inflation port, you just push the line down and then you pull up to lock it in place. So now we'll go ahead and put some air into our system. That way we can make sure we don't have any leaks. I'm going to put about 50 pounds or so. So the best way to check for leaks in our system here is to take a solution of soap and water and spray everything down. Now if there are leaks, you're going to have rapid forming bubbles occurring. So hopefully we can get a few so we can show you, but it will be pretty evident when they occur. So those look good. Now we're going to spray down each of our bags. So fortunately we didn't have any leaks, but if you guys have any leaks, they're pretty easy to fix. You may need to snug down the fitting on the back a couple more turns, or you just need to take the airline out and recut it. That's usually what fixes it. So now with no leaks detected, that's going to do it today for our look and installation of the Firestone Ride-Rite air helper springs here on our 2021 Chevrolet Silverado 3500.